We are pleased to welcome now Josh Hendrickson, chair of the Department of Economics and associate professor of economics at the University of Mississippi. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we've got a big turnaround, I should say, in our political realm. Quite the difference of philosophies between the current administration and the incoming administration with respect to economic and fiscal policy. Markets are somewhat reacting to this. I caught an article by Larry Kudlow, who used to, of course, serve in the administration in the first presidential term of Donald Trump. He was among his economic advisor, also worked for Reagan and so forth. He's got a career on Wall Street. But nonetheless, he said, I want to get your take on this. He said that he thinks the next administration under President Trump is going to be a boon for the blue-collar economy, something I really hadn't thought about a whole lot. But what do you think just in general about what appears to be rather abrupt differences on how the government ought to handle economic and fiscal policy?
Well, I think if you look at the market reaction, I think a lot of what they're reacting to is more certainty. So I think one of the problems with the campaign is we really had no idea like what a President Harris administration would actually look like. Whereas with Trump, we kind of know what it looks like, and we also know some specifics. So, for example, like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed early on in his first administration, some of those components of that tax plan are slated to expire. And so now that he is back as president and Republicans control the House and the Senate, everybody kind of expects that those provisions that were expected to expire will actually continue now. So they'll pass a new bill to kind of continue those changes. And then the other thing is, and this kind of relates a little bit to the blue collar thing, is that one of the things that the Trump administration doesn't really get enough credit for the first time around is that is their approach to regulation. So the approach to regulation was like, we're not just going to look at regulation on like a case-by-case basis, that the regulatory agencies were expected to essentially take a holistic approach. They were expected to have regulatory budgets, is kind of what they called them. And so the idea was like anything that you're going to do that creates some kind of cost, just like in any other organization, just like with any other cost, if you're going to create some kind of cost, you got to cut some cost somewhere else. And so those regulatory budgets really forced a lot of these agencies to deregulate certain things, and also to really consider the overall impact of their regulations rather than just, on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, totally agree. And back to your point, just as a business person and being responsible for often making difficult business decisions, absolutely, you're right. It's faith, confidence, and certainty. That's what drive investment, job creation, expansion. If you don't have that faith, confidence, and certainty, you tend to just sort of hunker down and kind of restrict yourself because you don't know when the other shoe's going to fall, which could be any point in time, and especially if you have an administration that's more anti-business than pro-business, and I think that's what we've been witnessing. So what Kudlow said is, we've seen some rises in the markets recently, but it's not all just driven by high tech. He says the industrials like Caterpillar and small caps in the Russell 2000 are going to benefit, and I think you're right, Professor, just from a more lenient regulatory environment. There's a huge cost to compliance.
Yeah, last time, there was a report by the Trump administration's Council of Economic Advisors back in, I think, 2018, that was like looking back at the first kind of 2 years of the administration and was trying to estimate like what were the benefits of their approach to regulation. And one of the things that they found is actually just relieving some of these regulations actually reduce like the average household income by about $2,500. So just by like removing red tape, removing impediments to economic activity, those things like have real tangible benefits.
Yeah, no doubt. So how do you relate this in the classroom and your staff, your team there in the Department of Economics? What do you guys talk about with respect to this? Do you bring kind of political thoughts into it as well?
I mean, I think it differs from person to person. I think a lot of times what we try to focus on is we try to focus on general principles. And also like a good exercise is to actually put this on the student. So present them with two different policies and then kind of say like, okay, so knowing what you know from this class, evaluate these policies. And a fun thing to do is not to tell them whose policy it is, so that they're not sort of biased by their own political beliefs or
Yeah.
something like that. And then kind of see where that takes them, and kind of work through what they think the effects will be.
Yeah. Well, are you seeing that the students at that age range, are they more pro big government, or are they more pro limited government? Are they in support of free enterprise, or they lean more into a more centrally planned socialistic style and system?
Well, I got a biased sample in the economics department. So in economics, most of the students appreciate markets. They really like, they understand kind of the importance of institutions, the rule of law, how markets function, how markets allocate resources. I think they have a much
Yeah.
greater appreciation. So the disagreements are much more sort of at the margin than they are about more of those big
Okay.
picture things.
Okay. You alluded to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the individual provisions, as you pointed out, are scheduled to expire at the end of 2025. And this is, of course, going to be a significant legislative matter that the Congress will take up. What do you think? Do you think it's going to get passed? I mean, on the surface, it looks like, yeah, the Republicans control all three, and this is really a Trump policy, and this ought to go right through. Do you anticipate any problems in the House or Senate?
I don't think so, because the issue is that whenever you kind of do these temporary provisions, it's really, really hard to undo the provision, right? Because um, the framing, if you're opposed to extending these tax reductions, is that you're actually voting in favor of raising taxes if you do that. And I think that,
Absolutely.
and so I think that, um, what you're seeing in the markets is, I think, is going to show up more broadly in the data, because I think when there's more uncertainty about, like, your disposable income in the future, people take that into account. And so, like, knowing that it's likely that these tax cuts will continue, give people a little bit more certainty to make decisions. And so now they'll they'll have the ability to go out and maybe buy some more stuff, or maybe take the vacation that they thought they couldn't afford, or something like that.
I think we'd have to agree that from a fiscal policy and legislative perspective, it's the most prominent of anything that they'll be discussing and deliberating.
Yeah, it seems to be on the very top of the agenda. It seems like that's the first thing that they want to kind of get done, sort of as soon as um, all of the new senators and House members take office, and Donald Trump takes the oath of office. I think that's one of the first things that they want to get done, so that they can kind of clear that up and move on to other things that they want to do.
It sure seems like voters express their frustration with the economy, always listing it as their number one issue going into the election. And more specifically, in this particular cycle, it's inflation. Sometimes it's unemployment, as you know, that's the other aspect of that. But we really aren't experiencing significant unemployment. We're not too far off the so-called natural rate of unemployment at 4%. But it's inflation. It's on everybody's mind. How do you see that playing out? The president says we're going to increase oil production and thus bring down the cost of energy, and that should, of course, filter through the economy and bring costs down. I mean, do you think that's going to happen? Like, are we going to return to 2019 level of pricing for groceries, for example?
I don't think we're going to see grocery prices go down. I think, but I mean, what we want to see is them stop rising. I think
Yeah,
that's
right.
and so but I think, like with energy, we might actually see energy prices go down. I think that if
Yeah.
you look at if you look at the appointments um, that he's making in the Department of Energy, in the Department of the Interior, the people that he's putting in place, these are people who favor a lot of, like, nuclear power, a lot of oil and gas, a lot of very cheap sources of energy. And so the more cheap sources of energy that we can get, the lower the cost that people will see at the pump, the lower the cost that people will see on their um, utility bills every month. And those are tangible changes, and those are things that people will notice. And I think that's one of the big things that I think that's one of the big selling points that they had in the campaign.
There's no doubt. And I think the other side really just ignored that that's even a problem and didn't really focus on it too much. And the Trump campaign focused on it heavily because that's what voters said was most important to them, for sure. Professor, enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, we're coming right back in the Alamut Wealth